Good evening, everyone. I hereby call this meeting to order. This is the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee of the City Council. Councilor Harris is excused this evening, and all other committee members are present via Zoom. This is a remote or online meeting where all participants will be on a video or audio conference. We are holding this meeting remotely so that everyone can participate safely while we are conducting business under a public health emergency. We appreciate your patience as we get accustomed to virtual meetings, should we ever be able to get accustomed to them. Members of the public will be able to speak to the committee if they have signed up for public comment per the rules published on Friday. Before each agenda item begins, members of the public will be moved from the Zoom waiting room into the meeting room. They will remain muted until they are called upon to speak, at which point they will have 2 minutes to provide comment to the committee. After that, they will again be muted. Between each of tonight's agenda items, members of the public will be moved in and out of the Zoom waiting room accordingly. So we will now move on to agenda item A, 078. Will the Zoom moderator please move in all members of the public who signed up to speak on this item? Okay, we are now going to go to public comment. Comments are to be addressed to the committee members only. Please keep your comments germane to the agenda item you are speaking on. I think we're a little ahead of ourselves. We're going to have just basic public comment now. Okay, so each of you will have 2 minutes. There'll be a 2-minute time limit. The timer will start once you begin speaking. Then we will let you know when your time is up.
The first public commenter this evening is Miss Marcia Kearney. Miss Kearney, are you on the phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead and proceed with your public comment.
Okay, the addition of 2 at-large members to the committee should be adopted, as the comp plan is to provide neighborhood protections. Those 2 positions should be filled with individuals that are a part of neighborhood associations and not developers or real estate. Neighborhoods need to be at the table. Thank you.
Ms. Kearney, are you on the phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead and proceed with your. The next public commenter signed up is Ms. Ward, who has not connected to the Zoom call at this point. Madam Chair, you are free to proceed now that we have gone through all of the public commenters.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. For those of joining us for this agenda item, you are watching the YouTube live feed for this meeting. Please mute or turn it off at this time. Our first agenda item of the evening is 078, amending 1416-262E of the Integrated Development Ordinance to add 2 at-large members to the Environmental Planning Commission. Councilors, would anyone like to make a motion on this? Councilor Borrego.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask for a deferral on this item. I'd like to make a motion for a deferral.
I will second that. There's a motion to defer this for 30 days?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Benton? Benton, you're muted. Counselor
thanks.
Benton, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Point of order. Can this be deferred before it is moved and seconded?
I'm not sure.
Can help us with that, maybe.
We
perhaps-
just asked for a motion and the motion was deferred. Okay,
Mr. President, there would need to be a primary motion on the table before, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, let me rephrase that. There would need to be a primary motion on the table before you could move a motion for deferral. The primary motion being a do or do not pass or no rec motion.
counselors, would anyone like to make that motion?
Counselor,
Counselor Borrego.
I'd like to make a motion for a do pass with no recommendation.
I believe that Counselor Borrego would be simply a do pass. Is that right, Mr. Melendez?
Is that right, Mr. Melendres?
Madam Chair, you have a couple of options. Councilor Borrego, a do pass has significance, as does a do not pass, as does a motion to move it to full council without recommendation. Moving without recommendation is distinct from a do pass. It means that you're not suggesting that the bill be passed at council. So if you'd like to move a motion for no recommendation, that should be your motion.
Okay, then I would like to amend that motion, Madam Chair, for a motion to move to full council without recommendation.
I'll second that motion to make this keep moving. Thank you. All those in favor say yes. I'm
Yes.
sorry, Counselor Borrego. All
I'm
those in
sorry.
favor, please raise your hand and say yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry.
I'm-
I'm sorry, we can't do that. We have to do a roll call vote.
Madam,
Apologize, guys.
Also,
I'm going to give this.
Madam Chair, I
for 30 days.
want to make sure that what I'm saying is clear. In order to move a deferral, there had to be a primary motion on the table. That only requires a motion and a second. You have options at this point now to vote on the motion on the table, which is for no recommendation, or to go ahead and move that deferral, which I believe was the original intent.
Counselor Borrego?
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that we defer this item for 30 days.
Yeah, let me second this first. I would second that. And now, Mr. Melendres, we can move a deferral, or we have to vote?
Madam Chair, the motion for deferral has been moved and seconded. That takes precedent over all other motions. So you need to dispose of that motion at this time through a roll call vote.
All right. If we would do a roll call vote, and then we do have a speaker on this. Counselors, are you all right if we let the speaker speak before we vote on this? Okay, if you would please let the speaker in.
Madam Chair and councilors, there was a second member of the public signed up to speak and they had some trouble connecting to the Zoom call, so they are here now and would like to utilize their 2 minutes to speak on this item before you move forward with your motion. Ms. Ward, you are free to proceed with public comment. You will have 2 minutes.
Am I audible now?
Yes, Ms. Ward, we can hear you.
Okay, before my 2 minutes start, I want to point out that the Zoom meeting link, information, phone number, password, all that information that was on the abzzone.com page under August 12th is incorrect. And to get the correct ID and password, you have to go into the PDF that is on the page. So that is a major mess up from the ABC to Z project team, I believe, and I want that noted. So now my other question is, which item is this? Sorry.
Madam Chair, Ms. Ward, this is the first item on the agenda to add 2 at-large members to the Environmental Planning Commission.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Counselors, so I do support the addition of members to the EPC. As the ordinance was presented, or the amendment to the ordinance was presented, it didn't look like, I do have some concerns about the language in terms of how it's worded in the paragraph. Like if we have 11 total commissioners, but you only have 9 districts, then you have to have some duplication of 1 or 2 of the districts. And so I think some of the wording needs to be clarified, as well as some of the, like what constitutes advice and consent, because of the council as compared to is advice and consent. It can't possibly be the same for representatives that represent each district and the at-large members, unless I'm confused about something. Because for the district representatives, the counselor brings forth 2 names and the mayor chooses. And the way I read it for direct appointment of the at-large, then the mayor would name the 2 at-large commissioners, but there's no role for advice and consent, is how I read it. And so I was looking for some clarification. But we do need community representation, because the way the IDO is currently worded, it's as if it attempts to make the EPC a technical committee, and that is not appropriate for its role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Thank you for your comments. Your time is up. Thank you, ma'am. So back to the item on the floor, and that is 078 with a motion and a second, a motion to defer. I'll second that motion. Let's take a roll call vote.
Counselor Benton.
Yes.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Counselor Gibson.
Sorry, yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes,
And Counselor Harris is excused.
that motion passes on a 4-0. That 078 is deferred. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 09. Counselor Benton, this is your ordinance. Would you like to tell us what it is?
Yes, thank you,
Just a
Madam
second,
Chair.
Counselor Benton, give me just a second. We have to, there are some people who want to speak, so we're
Okay,
going to get them into the room. Thank you.
all right. And I can give a brief introduction when we're ready.
Okay. Counselor Benton, if you want to go ahead and introduce your
Yes.
legislation, and then we will, we have some people who want to speak on it.
I'll go ahead and move a recommendation of a due pass on 029. This is adopting a zone map amendment to establish a character protection overlay zone for the North Fourth Corridor within the IDO. And this provides regulations related to massing and scale for development in the area, and references to street cross sections in the development process manual. And just really quickly, this has been in the works for some time now. It really, since we were really in the process of passing the IDO, the North Fourth Sector Development Plan, which previously existed, went through a lot of work, and it was a fairly modern sector development or quarter development plan and rank 3 plan. And this does carry over many of the provisions of that plan. I think it has pretty good community support. We'll hear from the public from the North Valley on it. But importantly, it addresses also the difficulty of dealing with 4th Street itself, the public right of way in 4th Street, which is limited, and as many of us know, has very limited pedestrian facilities and questionable ADA accessibility. So for those reasons alone, it's very important. I think that we provide a CPO for this corridor. We also just recently enacted a metropolitan redevelopment plan for the area. So thank you, Madam Chair. Move a recommendation to pass.
I'll second that. There's a staff and members of the public are required to be sworn in for this agenda item. City staff who may speak to this item, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Ms. Schultz, would you please provide a brief introduction to this item? Or should we go to public comment first?
Madam Chair, I think Councilor Benton accurately covered the intentions of the character protection overlay and how they intend to build on previous efforts for the area, including the old Rank 3 corridor plan. We did make some revisions to this item at the last UPS hearing in June based on public comment and a few things that we missed in the initial drafting. And so I think at this time it would be appropriate to move to public comment. Would you like me to proceed with calling the names?
If you would, please.
Okay, we have 2 people signed up to speak.
If I may first, our write-up on this says that the members of the public are also, staff and members of the public are required to be sworn in for this agenda item.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Before members of the public speak tonight, I can go ahead and swear them in for you if you would like.
If you would, please. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 people signed up to speak. The first person is Ms. Loretta Naranjo Lopez, who I do not see connected to the Zoom call. I'm going to look over to our moderator to confirm. Yes, so we will move on to the second public speaker, who is Peggy Norton. Ms. Norton, are you connected? Can you hear us?
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes, absolutely. Before you start, Ms. Norton, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Great. Please proceed with your 2 minutes.
Okay, I was here at the last meeting and I spoke in support of this plan. I was interested in Councilor Borrego's comments that she had worked on the North 4th Corridor plan and that what we're getting isn't what was intended. It's really been a challenge. I can't say how much and how confusing and how many different aspects there are. We all have visions of 4th Street and some of those are different. And there's things we'd like changed that can't be changed, like asphalt relocated, things like that. So, but the short of it is that the North Valley Coalition does support the character protection overlay. We appreciate the efforts that have been put in to it. And there are some continuations in the IDO amendments of facade design that we're concerned about. I know we're trying to figure out how to get all this passed at once. So we're in support of this plan. Thank you for your efforts, both Shanna and Councilor Benton.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. Nice to see you here this evening.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Borrego.
Yes, I just wanted to address Ms. Norton's comment. Yes, I did work on this plan. This is one of the last projects I worked on and managed when I was at the city, and that was like in 2007. We started in 2007, 8, and 9. And the comment that I made regarding the change was that there was some additional area that was added later on. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Counselor Benton, it's back to you.
Yes, Council Lup's members, again, I think as Ms. Norton alluded to, the process has been complex and, you know, it's been informed by developments that were built under the old sector plan that some people did not like and certainly had questions about their designs and so forth. What I would say is a really good outcome though of all that brain damage, if you will, has been that actually I thought some of our work on the North Quarter plan, the planning department and staff recognized that these would be good changes citywide. So actually a couple of the ones that we talked about originally are now on the agenda tonight to be adopted citywide, having to do with building articulation and tweaking some of the things that we've you know discussed over the last couple of years with regard to glazing requirements and some of the articulation requirements on buildings. So I think that's kind of the good news is that that those are good ideas and they were modern at the time that they were introduced and put into the sector plan and they're good policies today. So I do see Madam Chair that Ms. Naranjo Lopez is with us now. If you would be so kind to hear from her. Otherwise, I'll close right after that.
We would indeed. Thank you, Councilor Benton. I appreciate that. And Ms. Naranjo Lopez, if you would come in and we need to swear you in, please.
Okay.
Ms. Naranjo Lopez, can you please raise your right hand for us? Do you swear to tell the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please proceed with your 2 minutes of public comment.
Okay, this is on 2010, right? Or is this
Ms.
Okay.
Naranjo Lopez, this is in regards to the North Fourth Character Protection Overlay Zone.
Okay, I just want to state that we support our neighbors in providing that overlay zone for them. So that's all I wanted to say on that. Will I get a chance to speak on 2010? Not yet.
Naranjo Lopez, once we get to that agenda item, yes, there will be another round of public comment that you are signed up for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That is the last of our speakers. Councilor Benton, councilors, are there any questions or comments? If not, Councilor Benton, it's yours to wrap up.
With your support. Appreciate the work of staff on this thing too. I mean, everybody's worked really hard on it and the community.
Thank you, Councilor. We will now take the roll call. The motion is a do pass.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson.
Yes.
Thank you. Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. We have one more item, and that is 010, adopting text amendments to the Integrated Development Ordinance. Councilor Benton, would you like to introduce this one also?
1 second. Let me let people.
We're going to wait just a second while we have some more people sign up, and then you'll get the
Sure.
screen and the sound again. Thank you. Counselor Dixon. We have everyone in. Would you like to make your motion now?
Yeah, yes. On the matter of O2010, adopting text amendments to the Integrated Development Ordinance 14-16 for the annual update in 2019, I move a recommendation of a due pass.
I'll second that. And with that, we can have a brief introduction or a brief introduction by Ms. Morris, or we can go to public comment. Which would you like to do? Ms. Morris, would you please provide a brief introduction for this item?
Good evening, Councillor Jones, Madam Chair and councillors. Thank you. Yes, I'm just going to go to share my screen so you can see a PowerPoint screen. And I'm just going to go through a quick overview of each of the amendments where there has been a revision since the June 10th introduction of the amendment packet. The first amendment that's had a change to it is A17, site lighting. This was revised for the June 24th and the August 12th, today's LUPS meetings. The revisions exempted lodging uses and added some language on how to measure light levels when the development is at or on the property line. Amendment
Madam Chair, I just wanted to mention that I'm not seeing this on channel 16, what Petra's showing. I'm seeing something different.
I'm sorry, Councilor Borrego, this is not on channel 16.
I just wanted to mention that I'm not seeing this on channel 16, what Petra's showing.
Oh, wait, I know it.
I'm
Never
seeing
mind.
something different.
Yeah. Because I'm not on channel Borrego, this is not on channel 16. This is on
that I'm not seeing this.
So I'll continue if there's anyone who has their, okay, it's on mute now. Okay, so amendment A18, this was revised. This is the transit parking reduction. This was revised for the June 24th LUPS. And this added an area to exempt the university neighborhood area from the transit reduction. Amendment B3, this was revised for this August 12th LUPS, and this added a relevant section from the red line to the amendment that was inadvertently overlooked. Amendment B4, this was also revised for this August 12th LUPS. The only revision to this amendment was to rename it. We made an error in naming this amendment since it's in such a way that it's a little confusing. So this amendment has been revised to be titled Remove Conservation Development to make it very clear of what the intent of this amendment is. This amendment proposes to strike all references to conservation development in the red line of the IDO. Amendment B5 was withdrawn at the request of the sponsor. It's still in the packets because of the numbering associated with it, and we know that it was out there initially, and so while it's withdrawn at this point, it is still in the packet for transparency. Amendment B20, this is the tech edits. This was revised in response to issues raised by the community and further review of the tech edit spreadsheet. This was revised for the August 12th LUPS. Cumulative impacts, this was revised for the August 12th LUPS, and there's also a revised version out tonight. The revision between the June 24th LUPS and what was sent out last week limited the geographic scope of this to a ½ mile from the BNSF rail line and a ¼ mile from the Sawmill Spur. And it also removed certain vehicle-related uses, outdoor vehicle storage, paid parking lot, parking garage, park and ride lot, and artisan manufacturing. The amendment that's before you tonight that has a small tweak to it also removes any references to air quality impacts, as these are addressed through a process with environmental health. And the removal of this is to ensure there's no overlap between the two. Amendment B24, this is a new amendment. This amendment was added to the packet in response to public comment that we received at the June 10th and June 24th amendments, LUPS meetings. The comments were concerned about the creation of a no man's land between the wall required on the subject site and the adjacent property. The IDO requires a landscape buffer with a wall in certain situations. And what this amendment does is it switches that landscape buffer from being outside of the wall to inside the wall. When the landscape buffer was outside of the wall, as you can see in the illustration under outcome today, you would have the subject site's building, the wall or fence, the landscape buffer, and then the adjacent property, with the buffer kind of in between the wall and the adjacent property as no man's land. This would be switched up with this amendment, and so it would go subject site and building, the landscape buffer, the wall or fence, and then the adjacent property. So this would move the landscape buffer interior to the site. The other amendment that is new is also in response to public comment we received. There was concern that existing pre-IDO approved site plans that have residential uses on them are not considered a residential zone district. And there are ripples for how those properties receive or don't receive protections under the IDO. This amendment would add all pre-IDO approved site plans that are developed with residential uses to be part of the residential zone district. This would extend the protections of being a residential zone district to such properties. This would include uses such as light vehicle fueling, some intense industrial uses. It would also include liquor retail. That use was inadvertently left out of the explanation, but it is also part of the list of residential zone districts that this PD addition would have their protection for. That is all of the changes to the packet since June 10th. And so that is the end of my short presentation. My colleague Shana and I will be available for any questions now or after public comments.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Councilor Benton, you have a question?
Yes, just really quickly, I
Councilor
think
Benton?
the diagram, the labeling of the diagram just on the explanation is maybe confusing to anybody who might be looking at it for the first time. It was to me. If you could go back to that slide, that'd be great. If not, I can describe it. That was the B24, right near the end. Yeah, okay. So that diagram, I think that the current regulation is on the right. In other words, this is the problem that of the way it was written, is that it appears to say that the, oh, okay, I beg your pardon. I misread it myself, so never mind.
Thank you, Councilor. I like the never mind. I think that's the end of the presentation. And councilors, we do have several people signed up for public comment. So I'll turn this over to Shanna to take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have about 20 people signed up to speak tonight. We are not required to swear in folks for this public comment, so I will read the names. Feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video if you desire, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking. First on the list is Alejandria Lyons.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Alejandria Lyons. I am SWAP's Environmental Justice Organizer, and today I'm speaking in support of Amendment B21 Cumulative Impacts. So I know that there's been a lot of pushback on this amendment and by the city's legal team, but I would like to ask the committee, as well as these two parties I mentioned, what they know about the status of the environmental justice community, San Jose, and what they know about environmental racism in our city. So my group created a report 7 years ago on air quality in the city. And I wanted to read you all some of the things that we published, which is, this is a mostly Chicano community and that have fought impacts of the large and diverse industry that resides near their homes, community centers, and schools. As a result of the line running their community, as well as zoning laws that cater to heavy industry, these residents have to deal with industry presence that includes refineries, asphalt companies, an intermodal facility, cement plants, metal recycling plants, chemical and gasoline storage facilities. San Jose is also in between two Superfund sites. So we were asking for a cumulative impact amendment 7 years ago. And I would just like the council members, as well as this committee, to realize that it's now or never, and that we've been waiting for a long time, and that we are responsible not only for economic development in the city, but for the health outcomes of our community. So thank you all, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Marisol Archuleta. Ms. Archuleta, are you connected?
Hello, yes, I am here. Thank you all for your time. My name is Marisol Archuleta, and for 11 years, I've lived in the neighborhood behind the giant gas station on 2nd and Rio Bravo, which is essentially sandwiched in between the San Jose and Mountain View neighborhoods, right next to the railroad tracks. And I'm ready to voice my strong support for the B21 Cumulative Impact Amendment to the LEPS Committee. I door knocked my neighborhood when I was 6 months pregnant to fight a development of apartments by Ronald Pais that now currently create traffic problems and environmental issues and suck up water that we don't have to offer. He did not seem to have any problems getting his land rezoned, regardless of the fact that resident after resident showed up and opposed it. We've lost so many battles in this neighborhood, and you can smell the results as you drive down 2nd Street or use the Bosque bike trail. Porta potty companies, recycling, auto repair, demolition materials are what line our bosque and our neighborhood. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone to just like this, where our agenda item is last, but thank goodness we got through this one so I could give the comment this time. So hopefully when this meeting is over today, I ask you who will actually experience the effects of the decisions you make. It will be my neighbors and myself and my family, not the business owners who will go home to their clean air communities at night, and not probably you all who are in positions of power and who do not live anywhere near our neighborhoods. So tonight with this decision, what is on the line for folks? For businesses, it's money. For you elected officials, perhaps it's your position of power. For us and our families, it's our literal right to breathe and live life. So the priorities of money, power, or a right to live, which do you think should take precedent? Tonight would be a night where you could tell the people who look up to you that you stood with low-income people who live by the railroad tracks in Albuquerque, that you fought for clean air and for people over a company's right to make money, because you can't breathe money. You could stand on the right side of history tonight. You could stand with the families who live here. My neighbors and I will be watching to see if you listen to us, to see if you care about us.
Ms. Archuleta, thank you, Ms. Archuleta.
Use your power
Your
to
time is
protect
up.
our water and families. Thank you.
Ms. Archuleta, thank you very much. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Sal Perdomo. Mr. Perdomo, go ahead and unmute yourself at this time.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
My video is still on hold from the host, which is fine. So good evening, Madam Chair and LEPS Committee. My name is Sal Perdomo with Titan Development. I'd like to thank you and council staff for everything you've done for the IDO. and for all the updates that we're working through right now. I know it's a very heavy lift. We are in support of the changes to Amendment A17 regarding site lighting, Amendment B21 regarding cumulative impacts, and Amendment B24 related to edge buffering. We are also in support of the removal of Amendment B5. Among the LUPS technical edits in Amendment B20 are several that propose to reject EPC conditions number 46 and number 47. The result of these edits are to not allow any requests for a variance on sites that also require a conditional use. We believe, and I believe, that LUPS should follow the EPC recommendation and reject these technical edits to redline pages 419, 444, 447, and 449. We agree with the EPC in the redline draft as written that property owners should be allowed to request both a variance and a conditional use for the same property. The decision-making body can then make a determination on the requests based on the evidence presented to them, rather than outright prohibiting the requests from being made in the first place. Thank you again for your work, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Perdomo. Our next speaker.
The next speaker is Juan Reynosa. Mr. Reynosa, go ahead and unmute yourself at this time.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. I'm here once again to speak in support of Amendment B21, the Cumulative Impact Ordinance. As Alex mentioned earlier, this is a piece of work that communities who live in the South Broadway area, going further down into San Juan and Mountain View. This is an issue they brought up for years, generations almost. You could see it in the EJ task force. That recommendation was put in over 10 years ago. We've tried to pass policies at the city level to get this going with the Air Quality Control Board. And yeah, we have seen a lot of resistance, mostly because of the economic arguments against us. But I agree with previous speakers that this is an issue that can't be taken lightly. This is an ongoing environmental racism issue that needs to be addressed by the city. I know we have a lot of movement towards more equity along racial lines right now, and I hope that that extends itself into this committee. I think we have to start thinking along these lines so that not one race or community in Albuquerque is inundated with something that oppresses them more than another. We've done studies that show San Juan has a life expectancy rate of 20 years less than someone who lives in the far Northeast Heights with better air quality. And that's the issue we're trying to bring to light here. I think the IDO is a great place for it because in many venues we fought against zoning arguments, and I feel that like we need to solidify something in a document like this in order for environmental justice communities to move forward. So we definitely are willing to make this work, but it would have a huge impact for these communities, and we really hope that you all support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The next speaker is Marcia Kearney. Miss Kearney, go ahead and unmute yourself at this time.
I did. Hello, my name is Marcia Kearney, and I just want to say the IDO plays a critical role in implementation of the comp plan goals and policies. Technical edits are to improve the clarity and implementation of the IDO based on challenges in applying new regulations and neighborhood protections in rural world contexts. So far, the IDO, in the case of mixed-use zones, has in many ways ignored both the comp plan goals and as it relates to neighborhood protections. And it's also given the neighbors little to no voice. And when we are in a pandemic, the continuation of these hearings at such a great rate is a travesty to the people you serve. Amendment B9 is stating should be rejected. The council has the authority to address matters that impact the public health, safety, and general welfare in a timely manner. The IDO in many situations is doing the opposite on these mixed-use lands. The City Council needs to listen to what the people they represent have to say and allow them the time needed to do the review of these critical parts of the IDO. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Eleanor Walther. Miss Walther, go ahead and unmute yourself now.
I'd like to speak on A18 revised transit parking reduction. The IDO decreased the minimum number of off-street parking spaces required for a proposed development that was in 1,320 feet in any direction of transit stop or transit station from 10% pre-IDO to 30% in the IDO. This is a significant change. If this proposal is passed, increasing the peak frequency required for buses from 15 minutes to 30 minutes is another big impact. I suppose that if you don't have to make connections to another bus, this change might not have such a large impact. There are not many places where one can commute within just one bus line. I think that the change from 15 minutes to 30 minutes makes commuting by bus much more onerous. In addition, peak frequency is defined as 7 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m. This definition is not workable for people who do not have 8 to 5 jobs. Furthermore, the peak frequency definition does not specify which days of the week the times are applied to. So do these changes really only work for certain people? Also, what happens if services change and buses become less frequent? Then these cumulative changes have high impact on the residents of the development. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Esther Abeda. Miss Abeda, go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Okay. Oh, give me 1 second. Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Miss Abeda, we can.
Okay. Sorry. This is a little challenging for me doing this. Hello, Madam Chair and Loops Committee members. My name is Esther Abeda, and I live in San Jose neighborhood. I am here tonight to support B21 Cumulative Impact Amendment to the IDO. This amendment is necessary because of the disproportionate location of heavy industry companies and community of colors. 5 generations ago, many industrial companies started locating in my neighborhood. The people living in my neighborhood thought it was a good opportunity to get a job. The zoning was changed to accommodate businesses by our elected officials. Years later, people living in my neighborhood started getting sick. We did not know about the effects of pollution on our neighborhood. We later learned that locations, many polluting industries in one neighborhood was not good for our quality of life, health, family, and also our pocketbooks. We have suffered with unknown illnesses, only later to determine what health disparities are and the reasons our neighborhood is afflicted with higher rate of illnesses that lead to low lifespans as compared to the rest of the city. We also found out that forcing heavy polluting industries into community of colors is racial discrimination. I have attended many LUPS meetings, zoning hearings, air quality permit hearings to know the laws are stacked against our neighborhood. It is obvious that San Jose neighborhood is suffering from oppressed racial discrimination. Over the last few months, many people have become woke and now understand the practices of the past need to be changed. I urge you to approve B21 Cumulative Impact Amendment to be heard in front of City Council. I also like to mention, when the idea was in front of full council to be voted, my husband and I spoke, and the only councilor who publicly expressed concern for our community years ago was Ken Sanchez. My husband and I would like to thank Councilor Benton for sponsoring this amendment to hopefully help the community of San Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abeda. Next speaker.
The next public speaker is Loretta Naranjo Lopez. Ms. Naranjo Lopez, go ahead and unmute yourself now. Miss Naranjo Lopez. Oh, there you are. Miss Naranjo Lopez, you are muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Loretta Naranjo Lopez, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Stark Neighborhood Alliance. The Stark Neighborhood Alliance requests on Wednesday, August 12th at the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee that the amendments A1 through A18 be reviewed individually and to allow any of the public that wishes to comment on these items 2 minutes to comment on each individual item. The request follows the New Mexico Opens Meeting Act. The text amendment to the Integrated Development Ordinance require community input, and the Opens Meeting Act provides the public for opportunity to speak on each individual item. The text amendments for B1 to B25 and the recommended text amendments in the IDO should be scheduled on specific dates for each group. The Historic Neighborhood Alliance requests that the New Mexico State Statute and the New Mexico State Opens Meetings Act is followed, and the City Council provide community meetings to further review the rejected amendments that are not neighborhood friendly. So I have several amendments that we have put in. Peggy Neff has put in a chart, and so I'm just going to state that the HNA has reviewed packets A and B and still has many questions that need to be answered. And the reasons for further review is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents and to also preserve the character of the neighborhood. Further, the Historic Neighborhood Alliance requests the protection of the environment. The HNA would like to further note on the amendments B1 accessory dwelling units in MSPT and B6 existing accessory dwelling units be rejected. The zone category for R1 and MSPT existing accessory dwelling units needs to be allowed only through a conditional use without a kitchen. Kitchen shall not be allowed. South Broadway Neighborhood Association requests that this is a requirement in their sector plan or in the IDO CPO. The HNA recommends that City Council and LUP slow the process down so that all text amendments are
Ms. Naranjo
evaluated by
Lopez,
the
Ms.
community before any decision is made.
Naranjo Lopez,
Yes.
your time is up. Thank
Okay,
you.
I want to
ma'am.
thank you for this
Thank you. Your time.
opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next public speaker is Becky Davis. Miss Davis, go ahead and unmute yourself now. Miss Davis, you need to unmute your microphone.
We overlapped. Good evening, Council. Brief comments. The IDO red line document still shows definitions and discussion about the conservation development, even though several members of our community have expressed opposition to that amendment before. Please rescind conservation development from the IDO. There is still no definition of density except in terms of dwelling units in the glossary of terms in the IDO. People per square foot are a valid definition. They define traffic, transit patterns, utility usages, power, water, sewage of a neighborhood, not dwelling units. Please create a density definition in the glossary based on people, not dwelling units. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you for being here this evening. Our next speaker.
Our next speaker is G. Andres Romero. Mr. Romero, go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Andres Romero, and I'm the state representative for House District 10, which includes some of the communities that we heard about, San Jose, that runs south all the way into the Mountain View community. I'm here to speak in support of Amendment B21, the Cumulative Impacts Amendment. As you've heard from community members, there's a disproportionate amount of heavy and dangerous polluting industry within that area along the railroad tracks. And I think that the Cumulative Impacts Amendment would go a long way to ensuring that these communities are relieved of the burden placed on those communities. As you've heard from the community members that have been working on this issue for a long time, these communities suffer from disproportionate adverse health effects. And I think we all can understand that we want our families and our communities to truly thrive. And I think the Cumulative Impacts Amendment goes a long way in taking that initial step and ensuring that the communities and all communities in Albuquerque have the desired effect and the ability to thrive. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee.
Thank you for being here with us. Our next speaker.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Borrego has a question.
I just would like to welcome our state representative from the South Valley who was speaking. It's really a delight when we see our legislators get involved in these issues and respond to their communities and their constituents. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Thank you, sir. Councilor Benton.
Just quickly, I want to echo what Councilor Borrego said. Representative Andres Romero has been a great partner in the time that we've served together in an overlapping manner. Much of his district is not within the city limits. But he's been a great partner in the neighborhoods like San Jose and Kirtland and South Broadway. He's always there, you know, when we need to pick up the phone and talk. I mean, we've worked together on some really important issues having to do with these environmental issues primarily, but also water and infrastructure. So we appreciate his partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. I think that concludes the speaker, and our next speaker is.
The next public speaker is Deborah Meyer. Ms. Meyer, go ahead and unmute yourself now. Ms. Meyer, are you connected? Ms. Meyer is in the Zoom room, but it looks like she is not connected to audio at this time. We will continue to move through the public comment list, and if she connects, we will go back to her. Does that sound acceptable, Madam Chair?
Thank you. Thank you.
The next public speaker then is Kelly Cockrell.
It says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. Can you hear me?
Ms. Cockrell, we can hear you.
Okay, and I'm seeing Debbie Meyer is now connected, so maybe she can speak after me. Where is Don Harris? I connected her a little late, so I was just wondering where my counselor is. Isn't he in this committee?
Ms. Cockrell, Councilor Harris has been excused for the evening.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, so first of all, I'd like to say that B21, I fully support that amendment, and you know, human beings need to be considered. And it seems like it's kind of crazy that we have to fight for this. The IDEO seems to me that it's more developer friendly than it is human friendly. But anyways, I appreciate the fact that Councilor Benton has put forward that amendment and this amendment. The amendment is B25 plan development. And it, I think that it's important. I support it because humans and other living beings thrive in planned developments. I know this because I live in a planned development called Town Park, and we just got defaulted into a planned development by no choice of our own when the IDEO was implemented. So this is really, really important to all planned developments in the city. And as I understand it, PDs are either 100% residential or 100% commercial, or the mix of the two. And because Town Park is 100% residential, it would only stand to reason that Town Park should receive consideration for the same safety mechanisms like conditional use permits as residential zones. And furthermore, Why would the city of Albuquerque not want to protect all of its residents from potential disasters or adverse industry in planned development zones like they do in residential zones? We all pay property taxes, and we all care deeply for the environment that surrounds our homes. So we should all be equally protected. I feel like if anybody does not support these amendments, B21 and B25, then they are not friendly with they are not for the people, they're for the developers. It's for this reason that I support the amendment, and I thank Councilor Benton.
Thank you, Ms. Cockrell.
Next speaker. Support it. Thank you.
We will go back to Ms. Meyer. I see her video is on. It looks like she might have audio connection now. Ms. Meyer, go ahead and unmute yourself. Ms. Meyer, it looks like your microphone is still muted. If you're able to hit the unmute button.
Okay, I'm ready.
Great, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. I support your amendment to revise the definition for residential zone district to include property zone PD. This will have a huge impact on future construction of noisy and dangerous establishments so close to where residents live. For example, revising the IDO will prevent light vehicle fueling stations from being constructed within 75 to 100 feet of homes, an issue currently faced by Town Park residents. Now the IDO allows this kind of construction next to an otherwise safe, clean, non-polluted residential area. Specifically, Murphy Corporation is going to build a self-service gas station on the northeast corner of Eubank and Central, open from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily, adjacent to the backyards of the residents of Town Park. The disturbing short and long-term effects of a gas station with benzene vapor emissions operating nonstop for 18 hours daily will be detrimental to the health of the adjacent residents. In addition to the light and noise pollution, the air will be polluted with benzene, a known carcinogen that is known to cause leukemia and other blood cancers. The environment is a social determinant of health and can be modified, as are other determinants of health, such as education and literacy, access to health services, and socioeconomic status. I'm a registered nurse and hospice and palliative care nurse. I've cared for dying patients with the same cancers that are caused by benzene vapors, and these lives end in pain, suffocation, and agony. Please prevent this for the residents of Town Park and all city residents whose zoning permits construction with detrimental health effects. Thank you for your time in revising the IDO, and please consider making the zoning retroactive for Town Park to stop construction of the Murphy fueling station adjacent to our residential community. Thank you.
The next public speaker is Bill Ashford. Mr. Ashford, go ahead and unmute yourself at this time.
Okay, is my audio okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. My name is Bill Ashford. I'm an Albuquerque resident, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Nob Hill Neighborhood Association. I have comments related to Amendment A17, the site lighting amendment. Firstly, I'd like to thank the IDO staff and Councilor Pat Davis and his staff for writing the Amendment A17 and sponsoring it through the IDO update process. We are supportive of the A17 amendment, and we think it should be incorporated into the IDO. Bright lights can be a nuisance eyesore and detract from a resident's quality of life by creating unwanted glare and disruptive light pollution. Bright lights affect adjacent neighbors, and in the case of multi-story commercial buildings, bright lights on the upper stories affect non-adjacent neighbors. Historically, the allowable exterior illumination is limited by zoning ordinance, and the IDO is no exception. In Nob Hill, a deficiency in the IDO lighting ordinance was discovered. An excessively bright multi-story commercial building on Central Avenue with bright lights active in 96 upper story windows was found to exceed the ordinance. Unfortunately, because the illumination originated from internal and not external fixtures, the ordinance was not enforceable. Amendment A17 would correct this deficiency by revising the IDO to also apply to illumination originating inside a building. The allowable brightness for external lighting is not reduced by this amendment, so existing and new lights in parking lots, alleyways, and sidewalks are not changed, In fact, the maximum allowable brightness has been slightly increased with this amendment. Thank you for your consideration on this item, and hopefully Amendment A17 will be approved and included in the updated IDO.
Thank you, Mr. Ashford. Our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Ms. Ward. Ms. Ward, go ahead and unmute yourself at this time. Ms. Ward, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Would you repeat the speaker's name, please?
Ms. Ward, that's you. You're up.
Okay, thank you. Councilors, I direct your attention to subsections 55C5, parking reductions, beginning on page 249 of the red line version of the IDO update. This section has a combination of shall language and may language. It appears to give the planning director or anyone the planning director names as a designee authority to reduce or eliminate parking requirements for development based on various factors that are not codified in a meaningful, transparent, or reproducible manner. This sort of arbitrary authority is given in other subsections as well. Please indulge me this anecdote relayed by a local business owner who went through the process of demonstrating compliance with parking requirements. The business person made multiple trips and had multiple encounters with different city staff. Unfortunately for the business owner, different staff provided service on different visits. After leaving a visit with the information needed for compliance and taking the appropriate action and returning with evidence of the action, the business owner was told something different than what the previous staff person advised. This situation occurred at least twice. Upon the third or perhaps fourth visit, the business owner silently asked, "Is this where I bribe him? Is that how this works?" I submit that the language in the aforementioned section is an invitation to continued experiences as related here. On any given day, perhaps any staff person may decide which standard, if any, will apply to an important question. Contrast this situation with very specific shall language with regard to granting of variance requests. The IDO has subverted state law by essentially saying it does not apply to variance requests before a public body or agent purported to comply with legal standards. At some point, an appeal will make it into the court system, and the city of Albuquerque could be found to be in violation of state law. Please listen to and address the concerns raised by neighborhood groups appropriately and meaningfully. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening. Our next speaker.
Our next public speaker is Virginia Necochea. Please go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Yes, hello, good evening. My name is Dr. Virginia Necochea, and I'm here in my capacity as the Executive Director of the New Mexico Environmental Law Center. And we stand in full support of revised Amendment B21 and in full support of members of the San Jose and Mountain View communities. And it's a well-established fact that low-income communities and communities of color continue to be disproportionately impacted by land uses that cause environmental pollution. Frontline communities suffer disproportionate health impacts from environmental pollution, and the disproportionate impacts on frontline communities can be traced to discriminatory land use policies such as exclusionary zoning or discriminatory practices such as redlining. Albuquerque, we know, is no different, and we see these practices that continue to impact these communities. And we also see that the vast majority of industrial land uses, transportation corridors, and Superfund sites in Albuquerque are, to no one's surprise, located in low-income communities of color, such as San Jose and Mountain View. And so we support the B21 Cumulative Impacts Amendment, and we see it as an opportunity for the neighborhoods along the historic rail corridor to be protected from large polluting companies and for city officials to begin to remedy historic environmental racism. And that is why the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, we express our full support of the revised amendment B21. So thank you all for your work and commitment to our communities.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Stephen Abeta. Mr. Abeta, go ahead and unmute yourself now. Mr. Abeta, you still need to unmute your microphone. There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and council members that we hold in high esteem for being in the LUPS meeting tonight. The reason that we're here tonight is for the B21 Cumulative Impacts Amendment. And what's happening in our neighborhood of San Jose is that we have a lot of industries that have located in our neighborhood over the years. These neighborhoods, this neighborhood is suffering from what's called racial discrimination by land zoning. I was never aware of this until the United Nations came right directly to our house. And we spoke with the people with the Human Rights Network of the United Nations. And they told me directly, you're suffering from racial discrimination. And we've seen this all over the world, where heavy industrial companies are located in poor communities of color. When I heard that, I was taken aback because I've always had trust for our leaders. I've always believed that they were going to help us and never do anything to harm us. And so we have an opportunity tonight to change the practices that we've been doing in Albuquerque. I know there's a severe racial issue that happens in Albuquerque. It's called the Spaniards versus the Mexicans. Some people will say, well, I'm not a Mexican, I'm a Spaniard. But what happens is what they do is they go on ahead and approve terrible zoning laws. When they're in charge of different departments, they do everything they can to make sure that the polluting industries are located in neighborhoods like San Jose and not in their neighborhoods. This is oppression, and it's been happening. To give you an example, a similar house.
Mr. Abeta, thank you. Your time is up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Goodbye.
The next public speaker this evening is Daniel Regan. Mr. Regan, go ahead and unmute yourself now. Mr. Regan, you still need to unmute your microphone. We can see your image.
I believe I'm unmuted.
You are. We can hear you now, sir.
LUPS Chair and members, I'm Dan Regan. I represent the Nap Heights Neighborhood Association and the District 4 Coalition for Zoning Purposes. Several of you have indicated over time that you think we are dealing with administrative and legislative matters over which the City Council has complete control and can do as they think best. When it comes to the IDO, I suggest that all of you recognize that you are dealing with the private property rights of all homeowners in the city, and that according to state law, changes to an individual's property rights, be they residential or otherwise, cannot be made by government bodies without the knowledge and offered participation of those property owners impacted by the changes. I cannot possibly imagine that a 6-day notice emailed within a meeting announcement of 2 brand new IDO amendments and changes to 6 others would pass the smell test, much less a legal one, when the changes could impact my private property rights. What were the dates of publication in the local newspapers for these changes? I posit that you as a council committee are not sufficiently grounded to even consider passage of O2010 in a wholly legitimate way. And as to how you are proposing to process all the text/text edits and amendments, I can only say that it is preposterously ridiculous that a single up-down vote on a whole package would hold up in court. That's close to 680 pages of legalese, at least 130 of which have not even been seen by 95% of the property owners in the city. I suggest you slow down this substantially. I will forward to you these comments and my comments on Amendment B2 and B. I support B21 wholly as it is, and I wonder what happened so that the rest of the city is no longer considered necessary to protect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. And our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Peggy Norton. Ms. Norton, go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Okay, I'm really concerned to hear Dan Reagan's comment about B21 leaving out the rest of the city, because we really struggled with cumulative impacts in the North Valley with the transfer station. I hope the North Valley wasn't left out of that. But we do definitely support cumulative impact legislation. Last time around, I made a comment on cottage development. I'm not sure of exactly the consequences of changing those to MXM. We have MXM properties. Do cottage development apply to them? Do they get their choices of what they want? There needs to be a little more discussion about that, because we did spend a lot of time at the beginning of the IDO with that. I'm concerned also to hear that there's some sort of construction yard amendment, and it's very pertinent because we're just dealing with a variance that's been requested in our neighborhood for a construction yard to be allowed. The DRB criteria we supported last time, that third criteria that they use be retained and not deleted. Heights, we do not support the increase in heights. We were totally led in the beginning that heights have no relationship to number of floors, and now we need to increase the heights to allow certain number of floors. And then the ZHE shortcomings of notification that we've run into. This is my first time dealing with ZHE and variances, and trying to put it together as a coalition for an area that doesn't have neighborhood associations. And it seems like there is some processes that could be improved there. The facade designs, we do support that, although maybe they shouldn't be universal across the city. Other neighborhoods have weighed in on that, I believe.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. The time is up. Thank you, Ms. Norton, for being here.
Thank you.
Our next speaker.
Our next public speaker is Jim Strozier. Mr. Strozier, go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jim Strozier, and I first want to thank this committee and the council and planning staff for all of their hard work, and encourage you to move these amendments to the full council. I do have one comment on behalf of myself and NAIOP regarding Amendment B20 that rejects, and you heard about this from Mr. Perdomo, it rejects the EPC's conditions number 46 and 47. And what that amendment does is it will cause unnecessary delay in development projects. And we respectfully request that you support the EPC's recommendation on this that would allow and provide the ability for applicants to request a conditional use and a variance at the same time. This is important because I think for a couple of reasons. One is that I think it's important to be able to present the project in a more complete form when you go to the ZHE rather than breaking it up into parts. I think this is also true when we go out to the neighborhoods and discuss the project, because you want to be able to talk about it as a whole rather than split those processes up. I also want to express my appreciation for your consideration of my comments related to Amendment B21 regarding cumulative impacts. I think those changes are helpful and focus the regulations to the areas that need it and it should be applied to. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your time and consideration of my comments as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strozier. Our next speaker.
Our next public speaker is Renee Horvath. Ms. Horvath, go ahead and unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Ms. Horvath, we can.
Okay, thank you. I just want to express, I'm with the West Side Coalition, and one of the things that has been very difficult process of 2 minutes trying to give public comments on 41 amendments and 13 pages of technical edits. We have gone, several of neighborhood representatives have met together to provide a spreadsheet of going over just the amendments itself, not the technical edits, to try to give some comments to them. Most of them we are asking to reject, meaning hold off on approval, because there needs to be a lot more explanation on some of these amendments, because they really, some of these could have very undesirable results in the community of Albuquerque if we don't look at these further. And for example, we're asking that there be more review on cluster development. It's a great design, but it's good for some places, but it needs more discussion. Same with cottage development, great design idea, but there's a lack of vision and definition on that. Neighborhood edges, we're starting to see problems building two massive buildings right next to residential areas. One is transit parking. That will not work here on the west side, and I doubt that it will work for most of Albuquerque. We are already experiencing problems with reduction in parking, where we have angry customers confronting businesses having not enough parking. Also, solar protections. Love that idea. I'd like to see more discussion, because we're starting to see solar protection as being affected with residential. Technical edits, there's 13 pages of them. Have not had time to review them. I think please don't vote on all these.
Ms. Horvath, thank you. Your time is up. Thank you, Ms. Horvath, for being here this evening.
Madam Chair, that concludes our public comment for O2010 this evening.
Thank you. Councilors, are there any questions or comments? Any questions of staff? Okay, seeing none. There are 42 amendments this evening, 18 in packet A and 24 in packet.
Counselor, you didn't see my hand up.
I thank you, Councilor Borrego. Go ahead.
I'm a little concerned, counselors, that there are still comments from the neighborhoods that are asking for a little more time for review. And even myself, I mean, I went through these in the last couple of weeks, and there were a lot, even some added just today, which, or in the last day or so. And I think that it's, there's not any strict rule in place that says that we can't have 3 LUPS meetings regarding these. I think that, you know, and you all know my position when the IDO was adopted and I didn't have the votes, and I tried a bill to slow things down, and that actually never got a second on that, so I was not able to do that. But now I'm concerned that we're moving things again very quickly. And I probably don't have the votes again to slow it down, but I would like to consider that we have a third LUPS hearing on this, on these amendments, and that we refine things before we send them to full council. I think that I heard enough, I mean, a couple of coalitions telling us that they would like to hear some more discussion or have some more time. You know, I think we could have a third LUPS meeting and then, you know, take our chances at that point. There are some amendments here that I support, but there are some that I still have questions on myself. So I would like for the LUPS representatives to consider that we have a third LUPS hearing.
Councilor Borrego, if I may, this is the third LUPS hearing on these amendments.
Sorry, a fourth, I guess, to be correct.
Thank you. Councilors, are there any comments on Councilor Borrego's request? Then we have Councilor Benton had his hand up, and then Councilor Gibson. Councilor Benton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And certainly we want as much public comment as we possibly can, but let's just look at the title of this bill is the 2019 amendments to the IDO. And whether we agree or not with the pace of the IDO and any of what was laid out in the IDO for that matter, it's there and it's enacted and it's a commitment. The IDO, along with the comp plan rewrite or update, were commitments that included schedules of how things would occur. And you know, I know, Madam Chair, that you were gracious enough to let these amendments stay out there during the month of July. Most of us were working pretty hard on our regular council work in the month of July. I know I didn't get much time off, but it was out there for the public as well. And we were there and our staff was there for the public as well during July. And I don't know how many more we can, you know, how long we could extend it to a time when every person is able to fully understand, you know, this very arcane work, which is part of land use regulation, no question about it. And so I'm sympathetic to Councilor Borrego's concerns and to those expressed. But I do think we ought to get this to the full council. And we've got a lot of voting to do yet. We, contrary to maybe popular perception, we're going to vote on every single one of these amendments tonight and ask questions about them. But I'm sympathetic to the intent, but I can't support the motion.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. And Councilor Gibson, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, would be this: if we did defer this for one more meeting, what ramifications are there? What would happen that we would not want to see happen?
Councilor Gibson, if you're all right with this, I'll ask Mr. Melendres or Ms. Morris to answer that question. Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, so timing wise, if this was deferred, it would go to the September LUPS. And so that would mean that the annual update would, assuming it moved out of LUPS in September, would be reported out at the second council meeting in September. And so this would not actually get heard by the full council until October. This means that the 2019 annual update would overlap with the 2020 update, which actually technically the planning department would have some trouble submitting, as some of the language about the small mapped areas is in this update. So there is stuff in this annual update that the neighborhoods are waiting for, that the development community is waiting for, that the planning department is waiting for. So the pushing this to September would push all of those things to October at the
Thank you,
earliest.
Councilor Gibson, do you have more comment?
Yeah, so then I guess that makes me wonder if there are those things that are being waited for decision on, if we could pass those and not without passing everything to council.
I can ask a question on that, Ms. Morris or Mr. Melendres, but the question is, me, Councilor Gibson, only as another councilor, is how do we know which ones that the city needs and if those are the same ones that the neighborhoods don't like? And what would we accomplish by doing that?
Well, it was already stated, and I think after hearing as much public comment as we have so far, as well as getting email, hearing from our constituents, I think that we could probably make a, pretty good determination of which ones, at least the neighborhoods, are really interested in seeing to move forward. I'm not really making, not really necessarily trying to make a strong case for this. I'm just for sake of discussion and exploring that as an option. Really, it may be that that really may not save us that much time.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. Mr. Melendres would like to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just kind of point out some of the trajectory here and some of the maybe practical and technical limitations that may play in to that type of approach moving forward. If I understand it correctly, the concept is that some, but not all, of the amendments would be final and that they would be passed along, and some that are perhaps require less, that are kind of deemed as less controversial or require less ongoing debate perhaps would be passed, and the others could be held. One of the technical issues that we would run into if we attempted to go in that direction is that we're dealing with a single bill. And so those amendments have to be attached to that bill in some form. And so the question really, in order to vote on that bill, requires some final determination on those amendments, either up or down, in order for that bill to be ready to be voted upon, or for those amendments to be withdrawn. And if those amendments, in concept, I think that the council needs to have latitude to do what's appropriate under the circumstances. But as far as the timing issues, in order to appropriately deal with those amendments, would require the introduction of a new bill if you wanted to hold them without voting on them as part of the bill that's before you now. And so that process would be significant. And the IDO does discuss that new bills being introduced do go back to the EPC, and they go through the whole process again. And that's part of why the IDO contemplated a single annual update, because it contemplates that it's a predictable process where you'll have one opportunity to deal with these issues, and it's predictable for the public in that regard and transparent for the public in that regard, so that you're not juggling multiple bills that do different things. And that if something doesn't get through this time, you'll have the opportunity to address that through a subsequent annual update.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Melendres. And Councilor Gibson, I'll let you respond to that, and then I see your hand, Councilor Benton. Thank you.
So thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. We don't want to introduce or pass some of the, I would think, this is what I would prefer, not pass some of these amendments and amend the bill, pass the bill, and then create another update, a 2020 or 2019 update number 2, and go through the whole process again. That makes a lot of sense to me, of course. So, all right, thank you. I'm satisfied now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. And Councilor Benton, you're next, and I see your hand, Councilor Borrego.
Yeah, just quickly. So the next meeting at which this could be heard, barring immediate action out of this committee, would be a month from now on the 9th, full month. For further discussion of these, there's also nothing to prevent any counselor from bringing one of these back as an amendment before the full council, if I'm correct. I believe I'm correct about that. That this will come to the council as a bill, but please, someone correct me if I'm wrong. Any counselor can bring forth an amendment to any of these amendments, or for that matter, a new amendment before the council once it reaches the council.
Madam Chair, Councilor Benton,
Thank you.
that is correct. The council has the opportunity to entertain amendments before the entire assembly, even after the committee has finalized its recommendation.
Thank you for that, Mr. Melanderson. Madam Chair, I would just say that I, as always, would encourage anyone who, many of the speakers mentioned different things that they still had questions about. And it's always been the case during my time on the council that if a member of the public, no matter where they're coming from, community, neighborhood perspective, business perspective, if they've got something between now and that month that they need to have clarified with any of these, and of course they can work with their counselor, they can work with our staff. Questions will be answered by staff in a professional and expedient manner, I can tell you that. If you have specific questions about how something is worded, if we were to pass it tonight. So I just want to point that out as well. It's really important, although it seemed like we were down in the weeds when we passed the IDO about how this was going to unfold, whether it's this, or whether it's these annual updates, or whether it's the community planning area process, which has been delayed, unfortunately, first administratively and now by the pandemic. These are commitments that were made to the community. And like it or hate it, this is the venue that we've created for everyone, all of us and the community to tackle these issues and to hopefully continue to improve a zoning system that is new. And the old one, believe me, had a lot of improvement and constant amendments going on with it. And it's all very complex, no doubt about it. I will listen to any constituent, whether a business person or a community person, and I'm sure the staff will answer their questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Benton and Councilor Borrego.
Thank you, counselors. And I totally understand, Councilor Benton, with regard to the intent of the IDO and that it has been adopted. And we are on a trajectory to approve and review and approve amendments throughout. And I understand that we're looking at a set of amendments for a certain year, and we're going to be starting another year. But we've also heard from at least 2 different coalitions tonight, the West Side Coalition and the Heights, Northwest Heights Coalition, who have both said that they didn't have enough time to review these. And I think that even though there is an overlapping process, there's nothing to prevent us from adopting these in September at the LUPS and request immediate action. And so there's not really a reason that I'm understanding that we couldn't hear them immediately after our LUPS hearing in September at a full council meeting. In fact, if they go to full council, there may be issues with other counselors that may have concerns, and this is going forward as a packet. So if there were amendments that were not approved at the full council meeting, this would still have to come back to LUPS as a packet. And so those are concerns that I have, that and I may not have the votes tonight. I think in addition to that, we have issues with regard to COVID that has limited our public input process to what we're dealing with tonight is Zoom. Unless I'm being told tonight that there's something that's pending at the planning department or at the EPC level or somewhere, I don't really see why we can't defer for one more meeting, get some more input, make a decision, ask for another hearing at LUPS, and then, you know, send it forward to the full council with an immediate action request. I'm having a difficult time, and probably I'll lose this vote, but I would like to make a motion that we defer to our next LUPS meeting. And I may not get a second, but I think that I heard enough.
Councilor Borrego, may I interrupt that? There is a motion on the floor already. I understand it's procedure. Mr. Melendez, if you want to correct me on this, I think the procedure is we must vote on the motion on the floor, and then we can come back for another motion.
I thought we had to vote on them each individually.
There's a motion on the floor to and a second to do pass.
Madam Chair, the motion on the floor would need to be dealt with unless a motion that takes precedent is made. A motion to defer would take precedent and could be taken up for a vote prior to your final disposition of the motion that's already on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Melendez. That's why I ask you. So, Councilor Borrego, if you'd like to go ahead with your motion, make the motion.
I did make the motion. Thank you, Councilor.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second to defer? Seeing none, let's go back to the original motion of do pass. There was a second for that. We need to do a roll call on that, and then we'll come back, and if it passes, we will address the individual. Is that correct?
Point of order
Yes.
before I vote, please.
Councilor Borrego.
So, Mr. Melendez, the motion on the floor is a do pass for the entire packet to go to full city council. And we would not have to come back and vote on each item, or would we?
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, I wish that I could tell you didn't have to vote on each item since we're doing roll call votes virtually. But if you were to pass the bill, vote on the motion that's on the floor without first voting on all the amendments, then all the amendments would need to be reintroduced at City Council because they would not have effect from the committee. So you do have to vote on those amendments in order to make them part of the bill. Once those amendments are voted upon, the final vote would be to move to council with a do pass as amended.
So, point of clarification, we have to vote on each item prior to voting on the bill of do pass.
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, yes.
Councilors, unless there are other questions, it sounds like we need to go to the amendments. Mr. Melendez, does it matter which order we go in? Should we go with the B's or the A's first?
Madam Chair, I think our planning staff has done a really good job of staying organized on this. And so I would defer to Ms. Morris and Ms. Schultz about the practical order of the votes and how we could best take those.
Thank you, Mr. Melendez. Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, I have some slides for each amendment. And so what I suggest is I'll share my screen so you guys can see which amendment you're on as you take each vote. And so I would suggest we start with packet A and amendment A1.
Thank you. Councilors, are we ready to go there on that one? Okay, then, Councilor Benton, would you like to move the amendments or would you like for me to do it?
You're welcome to do it if you like. As co-sponsor, you're the chair, it probably would go faster that way.
Thank you, Councilor.
I would suggest that we move each for, unless one of the members of the committee is sponsoring one, that we just kind of go through them that way, and for purposes of discussion, at least, to move each one separately and put forward.
Unless there are any objections, Councilor, I think I will move each one where one of us is here to remove each one, unless one of us on the committee is a sponsor, and I will ask if that sponsor would like to move it. How's that? Can I get a show of hands on how that works? If anyone's happy with that? Okay, first one is Amendment A1. I move a do pass. It's barbed and razor wire is the title of it. And the information is up on our screen. Councilors, I need just a second on that.
Madam Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry.
if there's not a second, that's fine by me. Otherwise, I have a comment.
Okay. Just a minute. We're doing a little computer adjustment here. Okay. Councilor Benton, do we have a second on that? If not, Councilor, oh, thank you. Councilor Gibson, thank you for the second. Councilor Benton, you have comment?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to oppose this amendment. The original barbed wire language in the original previous zoning code was something that I sponsored, and I think it's correct. I recognize the concern of some commercial property owners to want to put up razor wire. And I believe under certain circumstances, they still can, but I don't see these. I think there are many ways to protect your property other than razor wire. And so I think what we had in there originally suited me fine, and I will not support this.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. Councilors, are there any other comments? There's a motion on this and a second on the floor for a do pass on A1. We're going to take a roll call on this.
Councilor Benton.
No.
Councilor Borrego.
Just a clarification. So this is changing our existing zone code to read this. Am I correct? What's on the screen?
Madam Chair, councilors, this is a summary of the bill. The details are in the amendment. And this makes changes to the barbed wire regulations for commercial property owners, but it also does have some impacts on residential properties. And that is the concern that Councillor Benton was referring to earlier.
I'm going to vote yes.
Councilor Gibson.
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you. Let's move on to A2. Councilor Benton, this one is yours.
Thank you. I'll move Committee Amendment A2. This is the cannabis retail suite of amendments. And these we're in anticipation of state action on legalization of recreational marijuana.
I'll second.
Counselors, is there any discussion? There's a motion and a second on A2. Take a roll now.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you, counselors. That passed on a 3-1 vote. The next is A3, Civil Remedies Procedure. This is a Counselor Harris's bill. I'll move a do pass.
Second.
Do I have it? Counselor Borrego, second. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0.
Counselors, that one passed on a 4-0. The next is A4, Cluster Development. Counselor Borrego, would you like to introduce this one?
Yes, thank you, Counselor. This sets some criteria and let me go to my page here. Some criteria for grouping low-density residential units located within cluster developments. And Counselor Sena and I are proposing this.
And Counselor, are you moving a do pass?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
The motion to do pass A4. Is there a second? I'll second that. Motion and a second for A4. Would you call the roll, please?
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Counselors, moving on to A5, construction contractor yard use. I am the sponsor on this one. Are there any questions? I move a do pass. Do I get a second? Thank you, Counselor Benton, for the second. There's a motion and a second for A5. Would you please call the roll?
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you. That passed on a 3-1. Next is A6. Counselor Benton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move, this would be A6, whatever number it is now.
Yes.
Yes, this is amendment number 6. And this is the contextual standards language and changes to that. And I'll ask staff to explain it. They can do a better job than me.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, contextual standards. This reduces the contextual standards for larger lots that are closely located to urban centers, main streets, and premium transit. This allows for greater flexibility when subdividing existing lots. This is intended to help with infill in those key areas that are in close proximity to urban centers, main streets, and premium transit, which the comprehensive plan has identified as our key areas for infill development.
And Madam Chair? if
I'll
I-
second your motion.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. It's important to point out in the explanation that in the IDO, when they created these contextual standards, it actually reduced the or increased the minimum lot size than what existed previously in the code. So this is in part to deal with that, at least when adjacent to the Main Street and the urban transit corridors. So that's what it's about. That was the intention. So it was explained properly, but that's an important caveat.
Madam Chair.
Councilor
Borrego. I just wanted to make clear that this does not affect property streets on the west side. It's only for premium transit, right? Am I correct?
Councilor Benton?
I would ask staff to correct that. I think it's any of the designated corridors that are mentioned there. So that includes urban center, main streets, and PT. I forget what PT is.
Madam Chair, councillors, the Main Street and premium transit would not affect any of the west side with the exception of Central Avenue. An urban center is Volcano Heights. So for areas in the Volcano Heights area that have the R1D zone category, they would have some flexibility in subdividing their lots in that area. However, that would not apply to the Volcano Heights CPO character protection overlay, as it has a minimum lot size, and so it wouldn't be able to trump something that is controlled by a character protection overlay, and the characteristic of that area is the large lots. So just Central Avenue.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Councilor Borrego, do you have other questions?
No, thank you.
There's a motion and a second for A6. Would you call the roll?
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Borrego,
Yes.
Councilor Gibson,
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. Next, Councilor Benton, A7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A7 is a amendment to cottage development, and I'll ask staff to recommend this. This has to do with reducing the size of a cottage development minimum acreage adjacent to those same corridors that were just mentioned.
Councilors, I'll second that motion. Are there any questions of staff? I think unless we have questions for the sake of going home sometime tonight, we'll simply introduce the legislation and get a second. And if there any staff or any of the councilors have a question, please just raise your hand or just call out. So are there any questions on this one? Okay, so this is A7. There's a motion and a second for a due pass.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Borrego,
Yes.
Councilor Gibson,
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Next in line is A8, drive-throughs. It is affecting the way drive-throughs are being set up. All those, I need a second. Make a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. There's a motion and a second. Any questions? Motion and a second on A8.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Borrego,
Yes.
Councilor Gibson,
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Yes.
Passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. The next is also A9, general retail sizes. I move a do pass.
Second.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Are there any questions? Call the roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Next is A10, to the maximum extent practicable language. I move a do pass for Councilors Sena and Bassan.
Second.
Is there a second? Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Any questions?
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. Next is A11, Councilor Davis's bill, liquor retail in the MXM zone. I'll move a do pass for Councilor Davis. Is there a second? Councilor Benton, thank you. Any questions? If you'll call the roll, please.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
No.
Counselor Jones.
No.
That fails on a 2-2 vote.
Okay. Next we have A12, neighborhood edge parking lots. Councilor Benton.
Thank you. I move passage of this amendment.
I'll second that.
Second.
Are there any questions, councilors? Therefore, a motion to pass on A12.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Councilors, next is A13, requirements in the NR zones. I move a do pass.
Second.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. There's a motion and a second for requirements in the NR zone. All those in favor, take a roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Next, A14, outdoor dining. This is Councilor Davis's bill. I move a do pass.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. There's a motion and a second for A14.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. A15, primary building frontages. This is Councilor Sena's bill. I move a do pass.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Are there any questions? There's a motion and a second for A15.
Counselor Benton.
I do have a question on this.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Benton.
I wanted to ask staff about this. Basically, it has to do with the minimum frontage requirements. This is required again on urban centers, main streets, and premium transit. And this bumps up well, basically, as opposed to a building frontage on these corridors, it, correct me if I'm wrong, allows up to 50% of it to be outdoor dining in lieu of a building. That's a pretty strong percentage. I just wanted to ask how that was arrived at.
Madam Chair, Councillor Benton, this language came from looking back at the downtown neighborhood area sector plan, which had some similar language to the IDO about bringing buildings up to the frontage, and it had an allowance that allowed patios to count towards the 50% primary building frontage. And so it's modeled on that previous sector plan. So half of the frontage of a lot has to be either a building or an outdoor gathering, seating and gathering area.
Madam Chair, I understand and support the basic idea here. But what we're talking about is 50% of 50%. Am I correct? In other words, the requirement is 50% of the frontage. And now we're saying the building can only be 25% of the frontage. And the other part is also open space, for lack of a better term. It could be open, this would be the dining. And then the rest could be, for instance, a parking frontage, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct about that?
Chair, Councillor Benton. So the IDO already requires that the building be at least 50% of the frontage. If this amendment doesn't pass, it just wouldn't allow that some of that frontage area include outdoor seating and gathering areas. The seating and gathering area would be any percentage of that primary area. Ms. Schultz worked on this one, so she might be a bit better able and audible to respond on this one.
Madam Chair.
Let me repeat my question. 50% of 50% is 25%. So this would result in a frontage that's only 25% building.
Madam Chair, Councillor Benton, the 50% of the 50% is not quite accurate for this amendment. We're only thinking about 50% of the frontage in total. What this amendment says is any amount of that 50% can either be made up of building frontage or of the patio. It doesn't further distinguish how you break down the patio frontage or the building frontage. It just says that it all may count towards the total requirement of 50%.
You know, I'm going to oppose this, councilors, and I think this totally goes against the intent to create some sort of building wall some kind along these major corridors. So I'd be happy to discuss it with Councilor Sena more and see what we could do before the full council, but I will oppose this amendment.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Actually, my question.
Yes, Councilor Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I'm going to ask this of Ms. Schultz. So it sounds like, I'm going to rephrase what I think I heard you say, was that the building frontage could be as little as 25% as the of the entire length.
Madam Chair, Councillor Gibson, it could be as little as 25%. It could be as little as 1%. If someone chose to make up the other 49% of that requirement with patio, the purpose here is that the flexibility exists that a development could have, could meet this requirement either with a patio or building frontage, with the intention that there's some kind of activity right at the street. Essentially, this prohibits a parking lot from counting towards that 50%, but for the purposes of the IDO, as long as there is a building or a patio that would hopefully be occupied by diners, that's the intent of having activity for at least 50% of that frontage.
So I'm trying to think of an application. I don't want to take a whole lot of time on this, but an application, maybe the front of a building that somehow comes to a point, or rather a shallow angled point.
Sure, Madam Chair, Councillor Gibson, I can give you a practical example that you might be able to picture. So a development that I can think of off the top of my head on Central Avenue, there is a Bob's Burgers that was recently renovated in the last couple of years and actually looks quite nice. They have a relatively small building footprint, but a giant outdoor patio. If that type of development wanted to come into one of these urban areas, that giant outdoor patio under today's rules would not be able to count towards that 50% linear footage requirement. What this amendment will allow to happen is for them to count that patio in addition to the linear frontage of their building towards that 50%.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Counselors, any other questions? Counselor Benton?
Yeah, just quickly. So here's how I can satisfy this, right? 50% of the frontage is a dining patio with the building in an undefined location behind that. And the other 50% of the frontage is a parking lot. Is that what we really want on an urban center? I would posit that it does not. So I think this, I understand the sentiment and I support some percentage, but I don't think this is written in a way that I can support it. And I hope the other counselors will not also.
Counselor Borrego, you had your hand up.
I think that the intent is really good, but I have some questions about the percentage. I'm still going to support it because I think we can amend it at full council if we need to.
Madam Chair and Councilor Benton, I would like to clarify that what's in the IDO today is 50%. So this amendment does not add that 50% requirement to the IDO. All it does is allow for an outdoor patio or seating and gathering area to count towards that existing regulation.
Counselors, are there any other comments or questions?
Madam Chair, just quickly, I'll go ahead and support this and talk to Councilor Sena about if we could possibly tweak these numbers somehow.
Thank you, Counselor Benton. I think we all have questions on this one, but I also will support and get it moving forward and see if we can get it a little more comfortable for most of us at the council meeting. So, counselors, any more questions? Okay, so there's a motion and a second for A15.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Next, we have A16, notification and facilitated meeting procedures. This is a piece of legislation by Counselor Davis and Bassan. I will move approval. Is there a second? There's a second by Counselor Benton. Any comments? Any questions? Therefore, there's a motion and a second for A16. Yes, Counselor Borrego.
I was wondering why this is not tied to the neighborhood ordinance that we're in the process of revising. And maybe the staff could answer that question for me.
Madam Chair, Councillor Jones, the IDO has very specific regulations about notification. In adopting the IDO, we took the approach that it made more sense for the notification stuff to be in the document related to the application, so that it was easy for the public to look in one place. And so that is why the notification requirements specific to IDO matters are in the IDO. Prior to the IDO, they were some in the narrow and some in the zone code. And that was confusing for people.
Okay, but that still doesn't answer why are we reviewing this as part of the neighborhood ordinance? Neighborhood association ordinance?
Madam Chair, Councillor Jones, yes, where there is overlap, that is part of the review of the narrow ordinance.
Okay, I'm probably not going to support this, Madam Chair, because I think that this is a policy that we should look at as part of that neighborhood association ordinance.
Councilor Borrego, thank you. I am not comfortable with this the way it's stated either, so I will also be opposing. But are there any other comments? There's a motion and a second for a do pass for A16.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
No.
Counselor Jones,
No.
and that fails on a 1-3.
Thank you, counselors. Next is A17. This is a bill by Counselor Davis, site lighting. Petra? Counselor Benton.
Second.
There's a motion and a second by Counselor Benton. Are there any questions or comments? Call the roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, counselors. One more in the A packet. This is transit parking reduction. Counselor Davis's bill. I'll move a do pass. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Gibson. Any comments, questions? There's a motion to do pass A18 transit parking reduction.
Counselor Benton,
No.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson,
No.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that fails on a 3 against 1-4.
Thank you, counselors. Do we want to take a little break or do we want to move right on into Bs? Counselors, do we need a 5-minute break?
No.
That would be a no, no, and no. Okay, here we go. We're moving into B1, accessory dwelling units. Counselor Benton.
Huh?
Thank you. I'll move approval of amendment B1.
Second. Any questions? Any comments?
I just had a question to be
Yes,
clear, and
Councilor
I think I know the answer, but I just want to be clear for the record. This also does not address, this does not affect Paseo del Norte and Unser Boulevard because they're not premium transit. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Benson, that is correct. Premium transit areas are Central Avenue between Louisiana and Unser.
Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. Any other questions?
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
No.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you, counselors. B2 is building heights. This is mine. I move a do pass. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Gibson. There's a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments? Counselor Benton.
I do have one question as a sponsor, Chairwoman Jones. There's another amendment to reduce that ground floor minimum height, right?
Yes.
Would that interface with this potentially? I mean, obviously in some way it would, right? That if that is reduced by 2 feet, don't they kind of go hand in hand in a way?
Ms. Morris, would you like to answer that?
Madam Chair, councillors, it does to the degree that if both pass, there's greater flexibility for those different stories or floors. However, this amendment on building heights is really aimed more at addressing the issue of parapets, and the clear height amendment is, if both pass, there's the greatest amounts of flexibility. However, if only one passes, this one really gives more flexibility towards parapets, whereas the other one is very specific to that ground floor area in particular zones.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. Good question. There's a motion and a second for B2.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Moving right along to B3, common open space definition. This is Councilor Senes. Move a do pass.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any questions?
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
I'm still deciding on this. I'm sorry, we're already voting on it, but I just wondered, can I ask a question?
Go ahead and ask a question if you'd like. Yes.
So how does this affect cluster development?
Madam Chair, Councillor Jones, Madam Chair, Councillors, this is very specific to cluster development. The common open space is the area that is preserved in a cluster development. The intention of the common open space is to preserve the land that was there prior to the development. So it's the features that you want to protect, whether it's agricultural land in the valley, or perhaps some areas on the escarpment that is undeveloped in a different type of development. If parks are considered part of the common open space area, this defeats the object of protecting an existing feature of the site, as the park is an improvement that is brought to the site. This common open space to include parks was actually a revision made at the EPC. The technical edits originally clarified that parks were not part of the common open space. They haven't been in the past. It was a technical edit, and there was public comment provided at EPC, and EPC proposed to include parks as part of the common open space.
And what
doing
exactly?
the opposite.
And what exactly is the revision in this, so I understand it completely?
Oh, the revision added an extra section that was inadvertently overlooked from the red line. So the revision for this amendment just made sure that we had caught all of the relevant sections of the IDO.
Okay, thank you. I vote yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
No.
And that passes on a 3-1 vote.
Sorry, I was on mute, talking and no one's listening. Councilor Borrego and Councilor Senna are the sponsors of B4. Councilor Borrego?
I would like to move this this particular amendment. And basically what it does is it removes all references to conservation development from the use table, use specific standards, chapters, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. I'll second that, as did Councilor Benton. Councilor Benton, do you have a question also?
No, thanks. Just wanted a second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second for B4.
Counselor Benton.
Wait, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Borrego.
No, it's
That's
Diane.
not me.
Sorry. I can't see you or your hand or anything about you. Councilor Gibson.
So I do have a question on this. I understand that there's a link between this and one that we heard and successfully passed, A4, I believe. And I believe that Ms. Morris can tell us how they're linked and the in the final analysis, what would happen, the outcomes for, well, there's the chart right there. So if
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. Ms. Morris?
Please discuss this for us? Thank you.
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, you just voted to pass A4, and so you voted a yes on A4. So if you vote yes on this B4 amendment, remove conservation development, this would mean that the only option for cluster type development would be this improved version in A4. If you vote no on B4, then the IDO would include two types. It would include cluster development and conservation development. Conservation development would allow the type of development where you preserve a chunk of land on the site, and then the remaining area could develop in any form you wanted, whether without necessarily requiring clusters or nodes of buildings.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, one follow-up question for Ms. Morris. Are there other provisions in the code for conservation developments? Or is this sounds like it's a brand new thing that we don't really have a spot for yet, or do we?
So, Madam Chair, councillors, conservation development is cluster development in the IDO today. So when we introduced the amendment with the revisions to cluster development, in response to this, the EPC recommended we create conservation development, which would be basically what we have on the books today for cluster. The concern was that if we have both cluster development and conservation development, that it undermines the changes made in cluster development. The argument for conservation development is you've got more choice available.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morris. I'm probably going to be a no on this, although I certainly appreciate the planning department's work on this. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to be a yes on this. I said that wrong. To remove this so that there's not duplication. It sounds like there's some duplication there. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson, if I may I ask you to get closer to your microphone when you speak? It's very difficult to hear you. But I got it the last time. It's just difficult. I'm getting old. Councillors, are there any other comments? There's a motion and a second for a do pass of B4.
Councillor Benton.
Yes.
Councillor Perdomo.
Yes.
Councillor Gibson.
Yes.
And Councillor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
B5 has been removed, so we're going to B6. Councillor Benton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move approval of Amendment B6.
Second.
This has to do with non-conforming secondary dwelling units and trying to allow them to be legal if they were legal at the time they were built.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. There's a motion and a second for B6.
Councillor Benton.
Yes.
Councillor Borrego.
Yes.
Councillor Gibson.
Yes.
And Councillor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Councillor Benton, you're up again. B7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move approval of B7 facade design.
Second. Councillors, there's a motion and a second for B7.
Councillor Benton.
Yes.
Councillor Borrego.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I had a question and I didn't jump in quick enough.
I'm sorry, Councillor Borrego. I'll give you a chance to ask a question. Thank you.
So my question to staff is, why aren't we not doing this for all of mixed use? And I have another question after that.
Madam Chair, Councillor Jones, heightened requirements are applicable to the urban center, Main Street, and premium transit areas. There are facade requirements for other mixed-use areas, but because the plan asks for more urban form in these key areas, our centers and corridors, that is why this applies just to the urban center, Main Street, premium transit areas.
Okay, so my follow-up question is that it's only premium transit, so it doesn't affect Paseo del Norte and Unser Boulevard, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, this is applicable in urban center, Main Street areas, and premium transit corridors, and adjacent to Paseo is an urban center. So mixed use development in that urban center would have to comply with these facade design regulations.
But only in the urban center area.
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, yes.
Okay, thank you. And my vote is yes.
Counselor Gibson.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. Sorry, I let that one get a little confusing. B8 is ground floor clear height measurement. Move a do pass.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. There's a motion and a second.
Counselor Benton. Counselor Benton.
Yes.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Gibson.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. B9, we're about halfway through this last batch. B9 IDO text amendment criteria. Move a do pass. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
And counselors, it sounds like there's some questions. Are there any questions on that for staff?
So these are the text amendments that I put somewhere. Right? The list of several pages of text amendments. Okay, there is one on here.
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, Councilor Gibson, let me clarify. I believe you're referring to the batch of technical edits, which is not the amendment we are on now. B9 relates to the text amendment criteria that someone must follow when they want to apply for a text amendment to the IDO. We will get to those technical edits, that spreadsheet that you have in hand a little bit later.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you, counselors. Are there any other questions? Did I get a second?
Yes.
Okay, there's a motion and a second.
Counselor Benton.
Yes.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Counselor Gibson.
Yes.
And Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, counselors. The next is B10, regulations adjacent to public open space. I move a do pass.
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Gibson. Counselor Gibson, you have a question? No, she doesn't have a. Counselors, are there any questions?
I have a question. I have a
Yes.
question.
Thank you, Counselor Borrego.
I would like for the staff to explain how or if this affects sensitive lands.
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, this amendment is narrowly tailored to the regulations that are applicable when someone is developing adjacent to major public open space. In the IDO today, if you're developing adjacent to major public open space, there are some extra design regulations that you must account for to address that sensitivity that you have open space adjacent to your property. What this amendment tries to do is say when that major public open space is across a very wide roadway, that those design regulations do not apply. Those design regulations are very important when the major public open space is very near to the subject site, but in those rare instances where the major public open space is, say, across a freeway, the design considerations could be different, which is what this amendment calls for.
So only for those types of roads, principal arterial or freeway?
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Are there any other questions? There's a motion and a second for due pass on B10.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones. Yes. And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. The next is B11 Pet Grooming Use. I move a due pass.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. There's a motion and a second. Councilor, any questions, councilors? There's a motion and a second for due pass B11.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Next is B12 Rear Setbacks in UCMFPT. This is Councilor Davis's legislation. I move a due pass.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any questions? Any comments? Thank you. There's a motion and a second.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Councilor Benton, the next is yours, B13.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move approval of the amendment labeled B13.
Second.
Councilors, there's a motion and a second on B13 recessed window requirement.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
No.
And that passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you. Councilors, B14 is about smoke shops. This is Councilor Davis's. I move a due pass.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. There's a motion and a second for B14.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
No.
Counselor Gibson.
May I ask a question here out of
Of
line?
course you may, Councilor Gibson.
So the only difference, I noticed it's the only difference between the use or mixed use for mixed use T, transitional, I guess that means, is between liquor retail and nicotine retail is CA. Is that conditional? What is CA?
Councilor Gibson, I'm going to have Shanna answer that for us.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Councilor Gibson, a CA in the use table indicates a conditional accessory use. So not only is the use conditional, so you must go through the conditional use process through the zoning hearing examiner, but that use must also be accessory to another use. So in the MXT zone, you could not have a nicotine retail store as a standalone. It would have to be attached to something like a gas station or a grocery store.
Right, okay. And one other thing, circle, no, I didn't. Thank you very much, Ms. Schultz. Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, and my vote is yes.
And Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that. Counselor Jones?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And that passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you. Next is P15, solar protections in the RML zone. This is Councilor Davis's. I move the due pass.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. There's a motion and a second.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Getting tired.
Thank you, Counselor Benton. Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Next is B16, Counselor Gibson.
Thank you. I'm going to move approval on B16 street side yard parking, and I'm.
There's a second.
Second.
Counselors, are there any questions? There's a motion and a second to pass on a do pass for B16.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Counselor Gibson, do you want to take B17?
Sure. Okay, I'll move approval on B17, the maximum side setbacks in UC, MS, and PT.
I'll second that. Counselor Benton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. Am I reading this right? I'm looking at the actual language change. Isn't it supposed to be for lots where there are 3 or more street side lot lines, or is it really 2?
Madam Chair, Councillor Benson, it's 2. The third being the front, but the front has its own setback. So it'll be if you have 3 streets, but street side is defined.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. Any more questions? So there's a motion and a second for B17.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Counselor Benton, B18.
Move approval.
Second. Any questions? Motion and a second for B18.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Passes on a 4-0 vote.
Okay. Thank you. Next is B19, Counselor Benton.
Approval of B19.
Second.
Thank you, counselors. Any questions? There's a motion and a second for B19.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Counselor Benton, you're on a roll. B20.
For purposes of discussion, I'll move B20.
Second.
And Madam Chair, if I could, Mr. Perdomo spoke to this in his comments with regard, maybe, I think I'm correct here. I think this is the right one. Just a second.
Madam Chair, Councillor Benton, it is.
This is the one with where there was a question. Mr. Perdomo was speaking in favor of the, and I think Mr. Strozier, of the ability to simultaneously apply for a conditional use along with a variance. Could you clarify this again, Ms. Schultz or Ms. Morris, whoever?
Madam Chair, Councillor Jones, if Mr. Melendres is available, I think he might be the one kind of best place to explain this one. Otherwise, I can take a stab at it.
Am available. Could you repeat the question, please?
Madam Chair, Mr. Melendres, my question was about the public comments about this particular amendment and the desire of some in the development community apparently to simultaneously apply for variances and conditional use at the same time to the land use hearing or to the zoning. Help me out here.
Zoning hearing examiner.
ZHE.
Yeah, ZHE. Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Benton. So there's a little bit of a complexity, I guess, just to the dueling processes that are associated with conditional use permits and variances. And a variance is, I think, can be pretty readily described as a safety valve from the zoning code that is available to people when they are out of options within the zoning code for how to develop their property because of hardships that they would experience that are unique unto themselves, that are not also experienced by their neighbors or other people in similar situations. And so it's sort of an escape hatch from the requirements of the zoning code that requires a pretty stringent test in order to satisfy, and that's the hardship test. How are you different from anybody else, and why do the rules as they apply to you, why are they unfair? Sometimes when a conditional use request is proposed, that request can go in advance of a request for a variance. And when the zoning hearing examiner is reviewing requests for a conditional use permit, the zoning hearing examiner must make an express finding that the use as proposed can meet all of the requirements of the IDO. And sort of by its nature, a request for a variance, this escape hatch from the IDO indicates that you cannot, in fact, meet the requirements of the IDO. And so there's a concern that if a conditional use permit is requested and approved, that the facts upon which that approval is made could change over time through a subsequent request for a variance, which could invalidate the rationale for that approval of that conditional use permit. Because again, in order to get a conditional use permit, you are demonstrating, and the ZHE must find that you can meet all of the requirements of the IDO. If at a subsequent time, for example, an applicant goes to the EPC and requests a variance, it could be that the facts that justified the conditional use permit at time one are no longer in place. And so this is an attempt to try to ensure more seamlessness and to ensure that when a conditional use permit is approved, which authorizes a use that is so sensitive and special that it is not a use by right, that the circumstances that justify that can't change on a community after the fact, such that something that was important, like a setback or a wall height to the conditional use, can be varied in a way that would allow the conditional use to proceed under changed circumstances.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. Councilors, we have a motion and a second on B21.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Next is B22. It's too bad Counselor Harris isn't here to talk about this. It's his bill about massage parlors. I'm sorry, B21, B22.
I think we're actually on B21.
B21. So this is Counselor Benton's.
I'll move
Sorry,
approval.
Counselor Benton, I got it. Yeah. Cumulative, B21, cumulative impacts.
Thank you. I'll move approval of B21 and
Second.
And just as was stated, I think by council, there were some changes made in this due to some conflicts and questions with regard to the air quality components, but this otherwise is the original cumulative impact amendment. This got a lot of discussion, so I think it merits me just making a quick statement. We did narrow this to the railroad corridor, the historic railroad corridor, including the Sawmill Spur, really is where these communities grew up. And they grew up without any zoning. They grew up with the railroad there and a lot of desire for industrial uses, but also a lot of desire for affordable housing for workers in the facilities along that rail corridor. So when we narrowed this from citywide to the rail corridor, I think there was a lot of symmetry in that, because that really is where some of our most struggling communities exist. And it's because of that historic laissez-faire development that occurred for many years, starting in the late 1900s. So I think this is important. I think we've done a lot of good work on it. There's a lot more work to do with regard to air quality, and I know that's our conflict that we had. But meanwhile, I think this is a really good amendment that I appreciate all the work by staff and all the mapping and everything that Shanna did on this for us to see what it really looks like. And we did include half a mile from the center of the main rail line and then a quarter mile from the sawmill spur.
Thank you, Councilor Ben. Councilor Gibson, you have a question?
Yes, well, actually just a comment. I'd just like to thank Councilor Benton for sponsoring this. I think it's a really good idea. And also thank you for removing the air quality aspect out of that. That just seemed to complicate it, that, you know, and since we're already doing air quality testing in the city quite well, I'm glad that this focuses on water and discharge of water. So I'm very happy to support this.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Borrego.
I want to thank Councilor Benton also for pushing this forward. I was actually one of the individuals who helped create the Superfund site in the San Jose neighborhood, and the zoning impacts that have been going on for many, many years have drastically hurt some of those neighborhoods. And also the sawmill area helped move the spur in that particular neighborhood. I think that in the future, we may want to look at some other areas of the city that have similar issues. And I hope that we can, this is just a beginning for this type of legislation.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. There's a motion and a second for B21.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Borrego,
Yes.
Councilor Gibson,
Yes.
and Councilor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Now we go to B22, Councilor Harris's bill. I move a do pass.
Second.
Thank you. Councilors, any questions? There's a motion and a second for B22.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Borrego,
Yes.
Gibson,
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Thank you. Next is B23, DRB criteria. I move a do pass. May I have a second? Thank you, Councilor Benton. Are there any questions?
I have some questions regarding this, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego.
My questions are with regard to the term discretionary. And it seems to me like what we're doing here is we are removing the discretionary authority for the planning director. And that gives me a little bit of heartache, because I think DRB actually has, is created in as part of an arm of the planning director. So I'm a little concerned about this. And I'm also concerned that, you know, the DRB should have some authority to send things back to the Planning Commission if they so choose. And so I guess I need to be convinced otherwise still.
Shanna?
if the staff wants to respond.
Councilor Benton?
They
Councilor
can.
Benton?
I would, if I could, Madam Chair, I'll just piggyback on that question. Yeah, I second this for us to go ahead and start discussing it. But I do
Thank you.
want to ask perhaps yourself as sponsor, Councilor Jones, or staff, the language that's being removed says that a requirement is that the site plan mitigates significant adverse impacts on the surrounding area to the maximum extent practicable. I know we removed that maximum extent practicable language, and I sort of understand that. But this is the key right here, as shown on the slide. Is it not appropriate, even though this is a staff and a technical board, do they not have a responsibility as well to consider adverse impacts in the sense of what's in the best public interest, even though we know they're not a public board, they're a technical board? That's my question.
Councilor Benton, I'm going to ask Mr. Melendres to answer that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego and Councilor Benton. I'll try to address both questions. I want to start off by pointing out that this does not address what the DRB is doing anywhere outside of its review of certain site plans. And so the discretion that the DRB would have as staff members or otherwise in their capacity of the DRB is unaffected by this amendment. This amendment is related to a resolution that was passed by the City Council, R19-152, last year, that tried to address some of the potential issues with the DRB's capacity to act in a quasi-judicial manner. And in doing R19-152, certain tests were amended and certain authority of the DRB was amended in order to ensure that the DRB and its processes were satisfying procedural due process requirements that are owed to parties that come before it in certain applications, not all applications, but in certain ones. And this amendment is sort of a progression of that. And the particular language that's at issue is particularly relevant to this type of consideration for the DRB because it injects almost unbridled discretion into the DRB's role as to how it will address impacts that without guidance. And so much of what the DRB does, and Councilor Borrego referenced referrals to the EPC and how the DRB may need to send things back to the EPC. That process is what it is, and it would be unaffected by this particular amendment. And so the DRB functioning as a technical board, doing things like ensuring that setback requirements are met on a subdivision plat or site plan, ensuring that adequate infrastructure exists, reviewing certain delegations from the EPC that are more factual and technical rather than discretionary, all of that would remain in place. And the test that the DRB would apply here would still have requirements for them to evaluate and ensure conformance with the requirements of the IDO, the DPM, to ensure that adequate infrastructure exists for these certain site plans. And the only thing that would be eliminated by this amendment is this portion that gives the DRB this discretion, in many ways unlimited discretion, to make a determination about rights associated with site development plans. And the DRB can potentially exercise that type of authority and has appropriately exercised that type of authority. The DRB can exercise whatever authority you delegate to it. But the problem with that vesting that type of authority with a board like the DRB is that we're asking them to wear multiple hats that are sometimes inconsistent with one another. On the one hand, they're the city staff person that is answering the phone when a developer calls, when a citizen, neighborhood person calls. They're answering that call and they're answering questions and giving guidance about city processes related to site plans. And then at a later point in time, we're asking them to sit in judgment on that same exact site plan. And that can result in issues related to ex parte contacts, which are a requirement for quasi-judicial avoidance of ex parte contacts, a requirement for quasi-judicial procedural standards that the city must follow. And it can also lead to procedural issues at the DRB hearings, where the DRB is called upon to make decisions, based exclusively on evidence in the record, based on offer parties the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses. And so it places this heightened procedural requirement upon the DRB that the DRB and planning staff members believe makes their job almost impossible to wear those multiple hats.
Thank you. Councilor Benton, do you have any other questions? And Councilor Borrego, Councilor Benton first, and then Councilor Borrego.
No, that helps quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Borrego.
So, Chris, is the DRB chair representative of the planning director, correct?
The DRB chair, yes, I believe is a planner traditionally. I don't know that, I guess in many ways it's a representative of the planning director, but it's a specific appointment to the DRB on behalf of the planning department.
Right. So the explanation you just gave in terms of possible conflict could also happen with the planning director, but the planning director has that discretionary authority, I guess. So what is the difference between the DRB and the planning director if the planning director overrides some sort of decision? Don't they? The same argument could apply.
That's a great question. And again, I just want to refocus that this is in the context of a delegation of authority to review certain site plans to the DRB, and that the planning director would not have the authority to overrule an action of the DRB in that regard. So what you're kind of parsing apart, though, is the various review levels that can exist within the planning department and the city in general. And they extend from a determination by the planning director or the ZEO on a matter, which is an individual officer that has been delegated authority by the city council to make relatively minor determinations about what the zoning code requires and the like, those all being appealable to the city council through appropriate procedures and processes. The DRB similarly is delegated that authority for certain things, but the biggest distinction here between what the DRB does and what the planning director does is the fact that the DRB is meeting as an adjudicatory body. And so when they meet together, not unlike the EPC or the city council, that forum that they're in is what brings in this presumption that they should be conducting themselves under heightened procedural standards, just like the city council and the EPC. And that conflict with their regular role as staff persons is what makes this a particular challenge for the DRB.
So that authority that you just talked about, that legal authority or legal responsibility, does it have, that's not in this amendment, right? We're not discussing that in this amendment.
Madam Chair, Councilor Borrego, you actually are, and it may appear a little bit oblique to a casual observation, but this amendment is getting rid of one component of the test that the DRB would apply to a site plan that gives that unbridled discretion that puts them into that quasi-judicial decision-making framework. And so in that sense, this is directly dealing with that issue.
Madam Chair, I think what I'm probably going to vote no on this for now. I may vote yes when we get to full hearing, but I really think that from what I read, we may need to do some further refinement on this.
Thank you, Councilor. Are there any other questions? Councilors, there's a motion and a second.
Councilor Benton.
Yes.
Councilor Borrego.
No.
Councilor Gibson.
Yes.
And Councilor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 3-1 vote.
Thank you, counselors. Good questions, good discussion. Next is B24, edge buffering. Move a do pass. Second, from Counselor Benton. Any questions, counselors? There's a motion and a second for B24.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Okay, this is our last one. B25, plan development. Counselor Benton.
I move approval of B25.
I'll second that. Any questions or discussion? There's a motion and a second for B25.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yeah. Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Counselors, I believe that there is no further business. Oh, I'm sorry. Duh. There is a big business left. I move approval of the bill as amended.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to pass the bill as amended. All those in favor, take the roll.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
And I'm just going to explain my vote. I'm going to vote no because I wanted to defer this, but so that's my vote.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
And that passes on a 3-0 vote.
Thank
3-1 vote.
One vote. Counselors, thank you for your patience. Is there any other business? Therefore, this LUPS committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.